Am I unmuted? Perfect. Hello, everyone. How are we on this beautiful morning? We have been so spoiled this year. My goodness, we've had so much sunshine. It's glorious because we know what's coming. But we'll take it. We'll take it while we can. Well, I hope that you've all had a good week. It was a busy week for us. Fall is just such a busy season, isn't it? I have two girls, and both of my girls, I don't know what I was thinking, both of my girls are in sports. And for those, many of you have had kids in sports, so I'm sure you know the drill. You have to take them to the practices, and from the practices, and to the games, and from the games, and then you have to actually be at the games. And so it's been a lot in this season, I have to admit. I don't know that I was thinking straight when I signed them up for these things, but they're having fun, so that's good. But we also are in a busy season. I homeschool my kids. And so now that school's in session, we spend a lot of time together. A lot of time together. And so generally, this isn't that bad, right? Homeschooling does work pretty well for us, but I will say it does also create some extra challenges. Trying to wear so many different hats with my kids is kind of exhausting sometimes. And this week in particular, I found myself feeling a little claustrophobic of being so much with my children all the time. Now, please don't get me wrong. I do love my kids. They are wonderful. But if you have kids, sometimes they drive you a little crazy, right? And so this week, I really had to get in a headspace, and I had to keep reminding myself of one thing. I had to keep reminding myself of the fact that being home with my kids is actually a miracle that I had prayed for. It's actually something that I had prayed years for. Because when I was pregnant with Viola, when Viola was born, Viola is my oldest, Malachi is my second, my youngest. When Viola was born at 6 months old, the job that God provided was actually for me. And so I went to working full-time while Brad stayed home as Mr. Mom for a few months. And then when Brad became a full-time youth pastor a couple months later, we needed 2 full-time incomes in order for our family to survive. And so I kept working. I ended up working a total of 8 years of my children's lives. And, even though I knew it was what our family needed, for me, it was really hard because I felt this ache inside of me, longing to be able to stay home with my kids. And it just never seemed possible. So it kind of just became this prayer that I kept in the back of my heart, like, God, if you could make that happen, that'd be really cool, but I really don't see how it can. However, in 2020, because of COVID, I was furloughed from my job at George Fox University at the time, and I got a taste of what being home was like. And it was wonderful. And it became overwhelmingly clear that for our family, moving forward, being home was going to be the best option for our family. Steve, do you need me to do something? Okay. We're okay. So, we had to find a way. And this was also, though, around the time when we took on the role of senior pastors at Faith Center, and so we revisited our budget with this new position, and wouldn't you know it, we realized that that was when I could finally stop working full-time. I was finally able to come home. Now, this was such an exciting change for all of us when God finally made that miracle happen, and it's something I'm still so grateful for. But I will say, homeschooling wasn't really part of the experience that I saw when I imagined being home with my kids. Homeschooling was not necessarily something I set out to do. It just kind of ended up being, again, what worked best for our family and what continues to work best for our family in these years. So it has been an unexpected path for our family and created some unexpected challenges to learn how to do school together. I never went to school to learn how to be a teacher. And so it's been a very steep learning curve. My girls have had to give me grace as I try to take on the role of their teacher, and I've had to give them grace, to give them a space where they can make mistakes and learn. And most of the time, it works pretty well. But I'll be honest with you, some days are so messy. Some days we have short fuses to navigate, over tiredness to wade through, challenging topics to learn, a gap between effort and requirement. And sometimes it's really hard to remember that the mess is actually the exact miracle that I prayed for. It can be hard to see the miracle in the mess, can't it? And it's really in this place, in this season, that I found myself empathizing with someone from the Bible who I never really gave a lot of thought to be honest, before. But now I have a whole new appreciation for. And that's really the power of empathy, isn't it? It helps us understand and appreciate one another more. So this person is somebody that I can guarantee you've heard of. This person is from the Bible, and whether you've grown up in church or not, I'm pretty sure we all know this person's name. Anyone bold enough to guess who it is? It's not Jesus. Yes, Noah, Joel, Noah. He knew. Oh yeah, thanks, I gave you the heads up before. Noah's story has been told so many times, hasn't it? It's been told so many times in Sunday school. It's been painted on so many nursery room walls. But I never really understood or empathized his experience. It's familiar, but I never had really dived into it because it's so easy to gloss over the reality of what he actually went through. Those walls just really don't do it justice. None of us have had to build a huge boat like Noah did, and so we don't always understand what he went through. So this morning, I want to spend some time digging in a bit deeper into the story of Noah to get a better understanding of his experience. Now this morning, I did not come with slides because I figured we'll just kick it old school and open up our Bibles. Is that going to be okay? Wonderful. So we're going to start this morning by opening our Bibles up to Genesis 6. Now, as we know, anytime that we open our Bibles, it's always important to get context of what we're reading. And so in order to get some context, let's just go through where we're at in history. Now, at this point in history, remembering that the Bible is a historical document, it's not a fairy tale, humanity had twisted itself. Humanity had twisted itself into a world where evil had become the norm. Humans did whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and that selfishness had created a world full of wicked, vulgar, disgusting people. And it's so sad because the Bible said that God was actually heartbroken at the life that his creation was choosing for themselves, and he was sorry he ever made them. So God decided to wipe them out and start again. But before he did, he found one man who lived actually different than the world around him, one man who still acknowledged and obeyed God. So God decided to spare Noah. He spared Noah and his family, and he decided to make them the ones that would go on to later repopulate the earth, but first they had to survive the apocalypse. Now, has anybody seen that all too classic 1995 movie Waterworld? Yeah, so this is the nonfiction version of that, and a much better version, I must say. So we're going to pick up in chapter 6, and this is what God says to Noah. He says, look, in verse 17, I'm about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die. But I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, into the boat with you to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird and every kind of animal and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. So Noah, rock star he is, did everything exactly as God had commanded him. When everything was ready, this is chapter 7, verse 1, the Lord said to Noah, all right, go into the boat with all your family. For among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and female in each pair to ensure that life will survive on the earth after the flood. 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Started in Oregon, obviously. Until I've wiped from the earth all the living things I've created. So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded. Verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. My goodness. He went on board the boat to escape the flood, he and his wife and his sons and their wives. With them were all kinds of various animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So they entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. Now, for empathy's sake, let's stop and dig into some details of the situation. There's a lot going on here. Now, firstly, let's acknowledge the fact that Noah was entering the ark for an unknown amount of time with his in-laws. Be honest, how many of us would sign up for that trip? Now, we can imagine that there were a few tensions that might have come up from multiple families being stuck in a confined space with no escape from each other. There were power struggles of sons who had already flown the coop and gotten married, now having to fall back under the leadership of dad. And then, not just sitting idly for months, but these families had to navigate shared responsibilities and rhythms in order to juggle the tremendous amount of work they had to do. Now, knowing what we know about human nature, it's likely there were a few tense family moments on that boat along the way. Noah would have had some work to do as the head of the household to keep everyone in line and on track with each day's requirements. Secondly, let's acknowledge the setting of the ark. Now, some of us enjoy experiences like camping, and some of us do not enjoy experiences like camping because of creepy crawlies outdoors. Noah not only had to invite those creepy crawlies indoors, he had to stay trapped with them for about 370 days. Now, I lived in Australia for 6 years, and you tend to have household spiders that you just put up with, but you keep a real close eye on where they are at each day, where they've transitioned around the house. I cannot imagine how many Noah would have had to watch and keep an eye on. Now, along with the creepy crawlies, he had an unimaginable amount of animals to take care of, which posed a lot of logistical questions, like how did he keep the predators from the prey? Where was all the food stored, and how did he keep them from just chomping through all the rations in one sitting? How did he dispose of the mess those animals made? That smell would have been awful. We would have needed some of Dory's candles on hand all the time. Now, some of you are probably animal lovers, and I like animals too, but my love for them has limits. Like, I love other people's dogs because they're not mine to clean up after. I thought I wanted a really cute little fuzzy mini cow for a long time until I went to a farm and saw one poop all over itself and then caught a whiff of its fur. I thought I wanted chickens in our backyard, and we even planned out and designed a beautiful chicken coop until I read about all the diseases that they can come down with. And I saw pictures of just how badly things can go wrong. One person even gave us this warning: if you get chickens, just know that one will die horribly. We did not get chickens. Personally, I can say I would not be a great candidate for Noah's job. But honestly, he wasn't a great candidate either. The guy was 600 years old. Now, this might seem unbelievable to us today, but there's a lot of things that have happened on this earth that we just haven't seen in our lifetime, and so we can't comprehend it. But 600 years old doing all this. This journey would have been demanding on even a young man, let alone someone who lives 6 times the lifespan we have today. But here's the thing. Noah was willing. Noah was willing, and the truth is that the only limitation on what God can do in our lives is our own willingness to let him do it. And on the other side of Noah's willingness was survival, salvation. God's favor and his provision, a chance to be written into God's story on earth and a new life for his family. However, was it ever costly? Knowing what we know about human nature, knowing what we know about animal nature, knowing what we know about Mother Nature, it's likely there were multiple times during that roughly year-long stint when Noah probably questioned his life choices. I know I can get overwhelmed by unidentifiable messes, but I can't imagine how overwhelming it must have been for Noah trying to lead his family through a mess they had never seen before. In fact, if I were Noah, I probably would have wondered what a lot of us have probably wondered at some point in our own lives. Where is God's miracle in all this mess? Where is God's miracle in all this mess? And it's actually in the book of Proverbs that we're going to find the answer we're looking for. So go ahead and take those Bibles and turn to the book of Proverbs about halfway through the Bible to chapter 14. Now again, for the sake of context, as I'm sure many of you know, Proverbs is a book that was written almost entirely by one of the wisest people who ever lived, King Solomon. And Solomon wrote this book in an effort to share the wisdom that he'd been given with his son, which is so relatable as a parent, but he also addressed it to people everywhere who wanted to live disciplined and successful lives, in his own words. And so because of that, we could say that Proverbs is like a punchy list of life lessons from Dad. Although there's no dad jokes in it, and I'm kind of disappointed about that, to be honest. So Proverbs is mostly a collection of punchy one-liners, and you kind of feel like Solomon just wrote each one down as they came to him, directly spoken from God. So it's in this one-liner form that we find one verse that pretty much sums up Noah's entire experience that we read about. And so at the same time, it's going to give us a piece of timeless wisdom as it answers the question we asked: where is God's miracle in all the mess? So in Proverbs 14, verse 4, it says, "Without oxen, a stable stays clean, but you need a strong ox for a large harvest." Now, although Proverbs weren't written when Noah was sailing the seas, Noah wouldn't have needed to read this to know that oxen make a mess. I can empathize with Noah, and I'll bet he longed for a clean stable. But Noah also knew that oxen were vital for life moving forward. So he submitted to God's process, which included unclean stables. Now, can I just see a show of hands? Does anyone own an oxen or two today? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Lucky for us non-ox owners, although Solomon says oxen here, he's not really talking about oxen in this verse. What he's addressing is a tendency that we have when things get challenging. And it's a tendency to get caught up in those challenges and lose sight of what they're working towards. So he gives us this one-liner advice: don't let the mess distract you from the miracle. Don't let the mess distract you from the miracle. You can have a clean stable. You can have a stress-free, quiet, convenient life that exists steadily and consistently without many bumps in the road. But that's not really what stables or our Christian lives are for, is it? If you want abundance and growth, a large harvest, a life that goes beyond basic existence, then challenge and disorder will likely come with it. Jesus himself wasn't immune to challenge and disorder, because progress doesn't happen without disruption. In order to get a large harvest, an ox has to come and dishevel the stable. In fact, it's that very dishevelment that's evidence of the harvest to come. That mess is proof of God's miracle at work. So Solomon is really saying, don't let the work in life overshadow God's provision. Just because you have to work doesn't mean God isn't. So going back to Noah, his days would have looked like endless work, wouldn't they? I mean, feeding animals, scooping up poop, somehow getting that mess tossed over the side of the boat. I mean, did they even have wheelbarrows back then? Did they have stairs in the ark, or was it just ramps everywhere? After countless days of hustling and grinding, being covered in muck, it would have been easy for Noah to miss the fact that he was in fact living in a miracle. Floating high above the destruction of the world due to something no one had actually seen up until that point, rain. Noah's family was surviving something that no one else was. God had provided their salvation. God was writing Noah's family into his eternal story, the only story that lasts, using them to accomplish his divine work on earth. Still, even though Noah was living in God's miracle, it probably didn't feel like it at times. Just because it's messy doesn't mean God isn't moving. And a lot of times, God's provision, his miracle of a large harvest, works through the dishevelment. Now, Brad and I were youth pastors for about 10 years. And when Brad and I were in youth ministry, there were a number of students and leaders who required us to ask God for supernatural levels of patience. There were individuals who disheveled us to our core. And there was one girl I remember in particular who came from a really challenging home. Her mom was always on and off drugs, and she was understandably angry most of the time. Now, this girl was cold to the people around her. She had a guard up that no one could get through. But for some reason, she kept showing up to our youth group. So it created hope that she might actually find the safety we knew she was looking for in Jesus. That she would experience his unconditional love, and that it might help her love and be loved by others. Help her to open up her heart, because we know those are what God's love can do. And so we were glad she came. But she was also so much work, because our whole team felt the strain every time she showed up. In her anger, this girl made it a point to rebel against everything that was asked of her. If we said she needed to stay in a room, she'd walk right out of it. If we asked her to be quiet during a message, she'd start talking with her friends. If we asked her to participate in something, she'd sit with her arms crossed and just stare at us coldly. And so after about a year of this, the hope of what God would do in her really started to get overshadowed by the cost of having her there. As much as we wanted her to find Jesus, it would have been so much easier for her to find him somewhere else. Just being real this morning. But she kept coming. She kept coming every Wednesday night, and every Wednesday night we did the best we could, messy efforts as they were, to love her well. Our team worked through regularly biting their tongues, exercising levels of patience only God could provide, choosing not to get offended at her cold remarks. I'll tell you, youth ministry gives you really thick skin, doesn't it, Garth? Yeah, it really gives you thick skin. But some nights really did leave us entirely exhausted and disheveled. However, it turns out God was working a miracle. Because when the time came for Brad and I to leave the youth group and become pastors at Faith Center, I was absolutely shocked by her response. On the night that we made the announcement, she came up to me sobbing, her guard finally down, opening her heart up to us and telling us how much we meant to her. And probably for the first time ever, she gave me a real hug. Not a stiff, icy, tolerated embrace like she had only allowed me before. That night, that girl clung to me. And so it turns out that in all the mess, in all the challenge and all the struggle of being pushed to our limits of grace, God had been at work in her, even though it didn't feel like it at times. We can't let the mess distract us from the miracle God is working in our lives or in the lives of those around us. The presence of work doesn't mean an absence of provision. God's miracle can work through the mess. For us today, we know God has provided a miracle. Aloha Church of God was facing a challenge of needing new families to fill, refresh, and care for this beautiful facility and continue its legacy. Faith Center was facing the challenge of needing a facility to house the new families being added every week and have a more solid foundation to expand the work that God's been doing. You know, the Bible is full of moments just like this where a need was the catalyst God chose to use to accomplish his movements on earth. So, in true God style, he's seen fit to answer the needs of two of his churches with one movement. And we're about to become a beautiful blended family. Now, those of you who have experienced a blended family will know that this is not an easy or straightforward process. We're also going to be working together towards utilizing this space in new and fresh ways, not all at once, but in movements, so we can provide what God's house is intended to be for our neighbors around us, a spiritual hospital. A place where those who are new to Jesus can feel drawn in and welcomed by him through us. And it's because Jesus tells us in Mark 2, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they're righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Now, because all of us are sinners, we know sinners are messy people, aren't they? But we sinners are exactly who Jesus came for. And aren't we just so thankful he did? So, we'll make adjustments and movements together in order to create the healthy, inviting, life-giving hospital God is calling us to build, so that we can experience and share God's health and wholeness together. So we can welcome the large harvest that God wants to bring to this church. God wants to do something new through us, just like he did through Noah's family thousands of years ago. And just like Noah, it's likely there's going to be some times that we're in the miracle that doesn't feel like a miracle. In fact, we'll quite literally be living in the mess together as renovations take place around us. But here's what we know. Most good things in life are not easy things. God didn't promise us a safe, easy life. He promised us a life of abundance, overflowing, so full that we can't actually contain it. We'll need to remember that without oxen, a stable stays clean. But you need a strong ox for a large harvest. And so, we can actually be excited about the mess around us because it means that God is up to something. And isn't it incredible that God wants to produce a large harvest of saved souls and changed lives through this church? That he wants to include all of us in his story at this point of history in Aloha, Oregon? I mean, what an honor. So, we have a choice to make. Will we focus on the challenges to come? Or will we choose to see beyond those challenges and focus instead on what they're working towards? Will we be discouraged by the mess, or will we be encouraged by it? I want to finish this morning with a beautiful reminder for all of us that sweet Jan already shared with us, but I want to reverse the context. I want to read it to you, about you, as a reminder that no matter how shaken things may seem, this is the God that we're anchored to. And I'm going to invite Marva to come up as well and play. This is the God that each of us are anchored to and are safe in the hands of. The Lord is your shepherd. You have all that you need. He lets you rest in green meadows, and he leads you beside peaceful streams. He renews your strength, and he guides you along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when you walk through the darkest valley, you will not be afraid, for he is close beside you. His rod and his staff protect and comfort you. He prepares a feast for you in the presence of your enemies. He honors you by anointing your head with oil. Your cup overflows with blessings. Surely, his goodness and his unfailing love will pursue you all the days of your life, and you will live in the house of the Lord forever. Imagine what we'll get to experience as we choose to press on through the challenges together, through the discomfort, through the things that might not make total sense at the time, or might even push us to our capacity of grace. As we keep our sights on the good things that God is doing, there's a large harvest to come. The miracle we prayed for is here. So let's not lose sight of it. Amen? I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing one more song.